Good evening, everyone. I'd like to welcome everyone to this first virtual meeting of Newcastle City's full council, all members joining me today, and especially everyone who's watching at home on YouTube. I did say my farewells to you in March. It was supposed to be the last meeting at which I would preside. I never expected to be doing another one, still less in the circumstances we find ourselves, but we are where we are. This is a very different and new way of meeting for most of us. It's clearly necessary due to the coronavirus pandemic, which has impacted all our lives. It's very right that the council gets together, however, so that we can ensure priority business can be dealt with. We have had 2 practice runs, so I'll move on to the first item on the agenda, which is apologies.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. We've had apologies from Councillors Karen, Robinson and Councillor Shapwell.
Yeah. If anyone else knows of any other apologies, just put them in the chat and they'll be picked up after the meeting. If we can move on to the minutes of the 2 meetings in March, does Council agree the minutes of the special meeting held on the 3rd of March? And at this point, I would ask you, if you don't agree, put something in the chat, because we can't go through everyone.
Agreed.
Agreed.
Agreed, Lord Mayor.
Agreed.
Well, nobody's putting anything in. Does then the council agree the minutes of the full meeting held on the 3rd of March?
Lord Mayor?
I believe Councillor McCarthy wishes to speak on this. If you can unmute yourself.
Thank you very much, Lord Mayor. I'd just like to raise Council's attention to item 108 from the minutes. So my portfolio report should have come to the next meeting of City Council, but we do commit to bring that to the September meeting, Lord Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Are the minutes agreed then?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Please put something in the chat if you don't, and there's nothing coming. So, if I move on to the announcements. As members are aware, our friend and colleague Councillor George Allison very sadly passed away in March. Due to the government requirements for funerals, Councillor Allison's funeral had to be limited to close family only. As a council, we're planning to organise a wider celebration of his life and contribution to the city, together with family, councillors and other invited guests at a more appropriate time in the future. However, can I take this opportunity to offer Council's deepest sympathies and condolences to Geordie's wife Julia and all his family and friends. Can I ask members to bow their heads and observe a 1-minute silence as a mark of respect? Colleagues, I'm now calling on the Leader of Council, Nick Forbes, to make us, excuse me, to make a statement on behalf of the Council on Black Lives Matter and the terror attacks in Reading as is standard practice. Councillor Forbes.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Good evening, colleagues. On May the 25th, the world witnessed the murder of George Floyd in Minneapolis as a police officer knelt on his neck for 8 minutes and 40 seconds. That appalling act led to an uprising as years of racial inequality once again came to the surface, sparking a series of demonstrations around the world by the grassroots Black Lives Matter movement. Just as we were shocked at the senseless killing, we've been inspired as people have come together from all backgrounds to champion the cause and say enough is enough. Here in Newcastle, the council's cabinet took to the knee, as did the 4 BME politicians who serve in this chamber and MP Chi Onwurah, in a display of solidarity from our city to Black Lives Matter activists all over the world. I'm proud that Newcastle is renowned for being an inclusive, diverse, warm and welcoming city, a reputation earned by our hardworking, caring and compassionate residents. But let's not pretend there isn't an issue here. Just like any other city, we have a significant minority determined to spread their bile and hatred, whether it be through social media or masquerading as counter-protesters, as was seen at Gray's Monument a week past Saturday, or posting offensive graffiti in Jesmond Dean or in the city centre. I believe I speak for everyone in this council and the overwhelming majority in our city when I say that there is no place for racism, homophobia or any other such poison in Newcastle or anywhere else. Of course, we all champion the right to free speech and to demonstrate loudly, but peacefully, for a just cause, and this council has a very proud record on equalities. What we cannot and will not accept are demonstrations as cover for hate speech. I applaud the public stance of Chronicle editor Helen Dolby, who is proactively working with her team to block and ban the cowardly keyboard warriors posting vile racist comments on stories related to Black Lives Matter, hiding behind pseudonyms. Our own communications team in the council have been working to manage as best they can some of the disgusting comments posted on our own Facebook page under videos and posts. We need our government, social media providers and law enforcers to do more to support these efforts and ensure that there are real consequences for those who choose to spread such hatred. Let's have some informed, intelligent debate about our statues, our street names, our history, what we can do to address the inequalities which exist in our city and society at large, and how our education system can and should be a force for good in eradicating hatred. Here in Newcastle, we celebrate Black History Month. We provide annual support for the Mela. We support a BAME staff group. We've introduced comprehensive diversity training for the council's workforce and work with the police to encourage both the reporting of any racist incidents of hate crimes and also support for the victims of them. I'm proud of the work that we do here, but of course there is always more that we can do. On Monday, we marked Windrush Day by raising the Windrush flag to celebrate the contribution of those who came from the Caribbean, answering the call from government to help rebuild this country after the Second World War. But many of them, the Windrush generation, suffered terrible injustices more than one generation later, and we will continue to call on today's government to right the wrongs of their predecessors. This council, Lord Mayor, will always champion equality for all. Black Lives Matter. Their fight is our fight for liberty, justice, freedom and equality. And Lord Mayor, I would also like to make a brief statement about the recent terrorism incident in Reading. On behalf of Newcastle City Council, I would like to send our condolences to the friends and family of the 3 men, James Furlong, Joe Ritchie Bennett and David Wales, killed in a terrorist attack in Forbury Park in Reading this past weekend. This barbaric attack was not only an act of terrorism, but a hate crime, a direct attack on the LGBT community that all 3 of the victims were valued members of. 3 friends socialising in the park whose lives have been cut by the barbaric actions of 1 person. 3 people who did not return to their loved ones on Sunday evening. 3 men described as kind, gentle, and fabulous by people close to them. Our thoughts are with everyone affected by the attack, the city of Reading and its LGBT community particularly, as they mourn. I have today written our city's condolences to the leader of Reading Council on behalf of Newcastle. And I'd like to say that on behalf of our city and our LGBT community in particular, we want everyone in Reading to know that you're in our thoughts and we are grieving with you. On Monday, all council buildings observed a minute's silence and encouraged our staff working remotely to join in this time of reflection. It's a sad indictment, Lord Mayor, that yet again we have to stand in solidarity with the victims of a terrorist attack in this country. But I know that as we do so, our solidarity makes us stronger and our determination grows every day to ensure that there are no more victims of senseless violence in this country or anywhere in the world.
Thank you, Councillor. I understand now that, as agreed at Constitutional Committee on 1st of June, it's proposed that Standing Orders 3A, 18 and 14 will be suspended so that the notices of motion at item 13 are not dealt with tonight. Is that motion moved and seconded?
Can I move that motion, please, Lord Mayor?
And Lord Mayor, I will second that. Thank you, Lord Mayor.
Thank you. I've taken advice from on standing orders about this matter, and there is no debate on it. According to our standing orders, it's just a vote. So we will have to go to a vote with your GoVote devices.
Someone raises a point of order, and I believe a point of order has been raised. You do need to take that first, I would suggest.
I've advised that it's a straightforward vote. And
you need to take the point of order first, Lord Mayor.
I've missed it. Councillor Ferguson, is it? Okay, Councillor Ferguson.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Yes, I would like to make a point of order on this. I would like to ask, is this move entirely necessary to achieve what the administration seems to want? Is it really a proportionate means to achieve a legitimate aim? The Lib Dem group actually views this as outrageous executive overreach, and we oppose the dangerous precedent it sets in the strongest possible terms. I am concerned that we're moving to a vote on this. Standing Order 18 allows for closure motions. We could move that a vote be taken on many items and still follow the normal order of business. Why is that being summarily rejected? It's incumbent upon us, Lord Mayor, to make democracy work when it's difficult, not just when it suits us. The administration shouldn't be allowed to do this, not just pick and choose business discussed by this council. It's not democratic. They're not a one-party state, and the recent internal disputes in the Labour group don't count. What's to stop the administration doing this over and over again every time it suits them? This is an incredibly dangerous precedent, Lord Mayor, and I ask, must we take this vote? And if we must, I demand a named vote on the subject. I am appalled.
Well, as I said, Councillor Ferguson, I have taken advice on it, and the advice I've received is that there should be no debate. And so I'm proposing under my discretion, therefore, to go to a vote. And do you wish this to be a name vote?
I wish it to be a named vote, Lord Mayor, yes. I would like to know who would vote for this dangerous overreach.
Yeah.
Yes, Lord Mayor.
So I'll need 10 names for a name vote.
Yes.
And if
Yeah.
Councillor Kane,
can you put them in the chat? Just put yes in the chat. Okay, I'll judge that as 10. So if we can take a name vote, please. This will be on, as will all votes that go on this evening, will be actually in the normal way we do them on the devices that you use for GoVote. Jenny Nelson is organising this, and she'll be refreshing the system. She's already done it. It's labelled vote number 2, and if you would please go ahead and vote in the normal way on your devices, not on anything you may see on the screen in front of you. And when the vote appears to be completed, I'll ask if everyone has managed to vote, and if not, we'll take their vote by some other way.
Lord Mayor, may I?
Right, I'm getting a message from one member. They can't log on to vote. That's Councillor Kilgour. If you'll just put yes or no, please, in the chat. Anyone else who can't? Councillor Lambert. Councillor Beecham, you want to say something? Can you unmute yourself? Right, the vote appears to be closed now. Is there anyone who has not been able to vote? Please put it on chat now if your vote hasn't been registered. Okay, well, the vote to suspend standing orders has been carried. So if we can move on. No petitions have been received this month. There are no public questions or addresses. So if I can move on to item 6, which is the appointment of leader and deputy leader of the opposition, I'll call on Councillor Woodwark to move the following appointments. Councillor Nick Cott as leader of the opposition, Councillor Colin Ferguson as deputy.
Moved as stated, Lord Mayor.
Seconded.
And is that seconded?
Seconded.
Does anyone wish to speak on the item? No. So are these appointments agreed?
Agreed.
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 Nobody disagreeing. So the appointments are agreed. If I move on to item 7, I'll call on Councillor Robinson to move the report on the schedule of council meetings, which is to be seconded by Councillor Durham. There may be some debate on this issue. I don't know. No, apparently not. But I'll say now that during debates, I will apply the standing orders. I'll allow 6 speakers on each motion in addition to any second mover or seconder. And I already have more than 6 names for each item, and I'll choose them as reasonably as I can. So, Councillor Robinson.
Right. Thank you, Lord Mayor. I would like to move the report and add that in 1.2, Council agrees to delay the AGM until next May at the request of the Lord Mayor and Sheriff.
Is that seconded?
Formally second, Lord Mayor.
Are you reserving the right to speak on the motion?
No, I'm not.
Right. Okay. Is that agreed?
Agreed.
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 Nobody wishes to speak to the motion.
Agreed.
Agreed. Right. Councillor Robinson, do you want to add anything?
No, thank you, Lord Mayor.
Right. So does council agree the recommendations of the report?
Agreed.
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 Right, if we can move on to item 8, which is on the COVID-19 response, I'll call on Councillor Forbes to introduce the report for discussion. And as I said, that I'll restrict it to the 6 speakers as indicated by standing orders. Councillor Forbes. Can you unmute yourself?
Sorry, Lord Mayor, I lost the connection. I had to log back in there, so I'm not entirely sure where you're up to on the agenda. Is it item 8?
We're up to item 8, so I'll go back to that. I'll call on you to introduce the report for discussion.
Apologies for that, and just a kind of practical illustration of some of the technical challenges that I think we're facing this evening. In introducing this report, the first thing I want to do is pay tribute and testimony to the council staff and the staff of many of our partners across the city, particularly including the health and care sector and the voluntary care and community sector, in keeping people safe in what has been an absolutely extraordinary and unprecedented time. We've moved extremely quickly to create new services to support the vulnerable. We've done our best to keep existing services going as much as possible, and there's been, I think, a fantastic collaborative effort to come together as a city to care for all of our residents. I want to also pay tribute to the residents of Newcastle and thank them for their support in observing the lockdowns and the social distancing rules. Our community spirit has been very evident in these very difficult times, whether that's looking out for each other, whether that's ensuring that people follow the rules in order to protect not just themselves but each other. But also we've seen many acts of generosity in people donating to the City Lifeline, as well as many of the mutual aid groups and other countless acts of support. Lord Mayor, we are one of the vanguard areas to establish the new test, trace and track system, and I believe this is absolutely crucial to getting the economy and the city moving quickly and safely. Safety is our #1 priority, and I have to say that I'm a little concerned sometimes by the pace in which government makes announcements and expect them to be delivered on the ground. A classic example of this was the announcement about schools opening up with very little consideration to the very real and logistical challenges of ensuring that children in a whole variety of different school settings could be kept safe. Again, I want to thank all of those who work in our schools and all of those who've supported them, particularly those staff within the City Council, to ensure we have comprehensive risk assessments for every school, that we have plans in place to ensure safety, including the eventuality or possibility of an outbreak in any particular school. We are working, Lord Mayor, as fast as we can to keep everybody safe. And of course, this report sets out the detail on some of the steps that we're taking with our partners, particularly in the city centre, to restart the city safely. I want to particularly welcome the proactive role played by the business community and anyone. And if anybody has been down Northumberland Street in recent days, you'll see it's a very different place to what it was a few months ago. We have a one-way system in place. There are space markings on the pavement for people queuing outside shops. And of course, we have a number of staff acting as city hosts, ensuring that people feel safe and supported and can answer any questions that members of the public may ask. And those are, on the whole, staff redeployed from the library service, and they're doing an absolutely magnificent job. We welcome the grant of 2.2 million from the government to support the development of the Newcastle COVID control plan. But I have to say, I'm not entirely convinced that the level of resource that we've received so far will be the total amount of resources that we need in order to support the activities that we need to work through. Of course, if resources here are insufficient, then we'll have to go back to government and ask that they increase the funding so that we can do the job properly. We're also sharing, Lord Mayor, our expertise and experience with other local areas. I gave a presentation earlier in the week to a ministerial advisory group on the steps that we're taking. And I can let council know that ministers in government see what's happening in Newcastle as many examples of national good practice. We're sharing that good practice with not just the other practice areas, but many other local authorities around the country. The other important aspect of this report notes that we're complementing the Wellbeing for Life Board with additional members to support the City Futures Board. I'll come back to that in the next item. But the challenge that we still face as a local authority is in bridging the financial gap that opens up for us in year. We have three areas of additional cost: direct costs that we've paid out as a direct result of the crisis. So all the help that we've given vulnerable people, all of the work that we've done to provide food parcels and help, all of the work that we've been doing with the voluntary sector, all of the extra work that we've been doing with our care system, and all of the additional PPE that we've had to buy. All of that is direct extra cost. But we've also lost a significant amount of income through our commercial services, and while that's come as a direct result of the government closing down the country, so far we have yet to win the argument about the government compensating us for those losses. It's worth bearing in mind that many businesses who've been affected have received some form of compensation, whereas we haven't yet. And then, of course, there are the savings that we agreed just at our last meeting in March as a city council, which were mainly in the field of adult services, which of course are now unachievable savings in the current situation and the current financial year. All of that adds up, Lord Mayor, to a very significant financial gap for the council of somewhere in the region of £64 million. We've received two tranches of money from government so far, amounting to £18 million, which still leaves us a very significant financial gap, depending on how you draw the boundaries of it, of between 45 and 50 million pounds, which, if we don't have closed in the current financial year, will mean inevitably some very difficult decisions about expenditure, not for the next financial year, but in this financial year, which is why I continue to join with councils all around the country to lobby the government for an appropriate financial settlement, which gives us proper recompense for the scale of the challenge that we have faced as local authorities. There's a huge amount in this report, Lord Mayor, which I'm very happy to ask questions, and of course the Council's Chief Executive is also on the in the meeting tonight, listening in carefully. So if any members have any issues they wish to raise, I'm happy to try to respond to them. But the overwhelming thing that I'm most proud of, Lord Mayor, is the spirit of collaboration and partnership, which has shone like a beacon in this city in the last 3 months, and of which I am, as this council's leader, I'm immensely proud. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Forbes. Councillor Ashby, you've indicated you wish to speak. Make sure you unmute yourself. Councillor Ashby. We can't hear you, Councillor Ashby. Can I move on? We'll try and get that sorted out. And can I move on to Councillor Cott?
Thank you very much, Lord Mayor, and I hope you can hear me and everyone else can hear me. Thank you very much. I would just like to start similarly as the leader to thank all the staff and agencies across the city who have been involved in what is a very difficult situation and all the work that they are doing. I'd also like to thank all the volunteers. There's been so much volunteering going across the city in various communities, in our wards. We ought to also thank all those volunteers for giving up their time and doing what's good for the community. And I do think Councillor Forbes is absolutely right when he praises the community spirit which exists in this city. We need to hold on to that because the times ahead are going to be very tough. So I certainly wish to put on record my thanks to all of those people, and I think on behalf of my political group as well. Councillor Forbes, in terms of your report, I'm very interested in these issues, and I think you can certainly assume that the opposition will work constructively with the administration over this emergency period. We may ask questions from time to time and may make suggestions about alternatives, but we need to be united where it is important around many of these significant issues. There's a couple of things that I wanted to raise in relation to this particular situation. I agree with you that finances are going to be very tough, and this is a great challenge. But I do worry sometimes when we start to conflate loss of revenue with some of the loss in terms of the general budget that we have. I think sometimes that can give a misleading picture, and it doesn't always do us a great service to be mixing up different aspects of our budget. So I think Councillor Forbes might need to be a little careful about that, but not to underestimate the enormity of this situation, of course. I'm interested and I'm very pleased, and we'll be coming on to it in the next report. So I'll just say at the moment, I'm very pleased with the setting up of the recovery board, because that does provide a number of possibilities for joint working. But there was one particular issue that I was thinking about. Given the level of resource and the level of need that's there, we have a very challenging series of issues to address in the immediate term, and a deadline is set for the 31st of July to put most of this into place, particularly the track and trace, but also other key aspects of our work. And I'm just wishing to ask Councillor Forbes whether he thinks that the council will be able to meet that deadline given the challenge of budgets that lie ahead. And if there's any need for additional resource, then please feel free to contact me and members of the opposition in case there's a need for any joint working, so we can have a united front when we speak to the government if we do need additional resource. Thank you very much, Lord Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Cott. Remiss of me not to have congratulated you on your appointment as Leader of the Opposition. Councillor Schofield. Councillor Schofield.
Yes, I'm here. Sorry. Thank you, Lord Mayor. I'd also like to welcome this report, and I'd like to echo the leader of the opposition in saying that we have so much to be grateful for in the strong political leadership of Councillor Gorgar as Cabinet Member for Adult Social Care, and the amazing work of Alison McDowell and Eugene Mill and their staff teams, and those in the voluntary sector, as well as all the workers we've been clapping on Thursday nights to keep as many people as possible in Newcastle safe and well during the pandemic. Among their other work, they've worked tirelessly to support Newcastle care homes and domiciliary arrangements to protect staff and residents. But despite their combined efforts, the number of deaths recorded as COVID-19 in Newcastle has been higher than those recorded for North East or for England. This is in contrast to in hospitals where the order is reversed. Why this case is a bit unclear, but there is a very good detailed breakdown of figures available in the report. Well, the Department of Health and Social Care has acknowledged the need for help of local authorities to control the local outbreaks. And we've reason, as been said by the leader, to be very proud that Newcastle is one of the 11 areas asked by the government to develop and test schemes to control the outbreaks locally. And through the new board, a local control plan is now in construction. For this, Accurate national and local data and its integration is essential. So the huge political and organisational task ahead for the board has to be set in the context of this government's serious failure regarding their handling of the pandemic nationally and abysmal data gathering and analysis. First, its guidance on the recovery phase of pandemic planning updated 24th November 2017 did not envisage the need for such local outbreak control. And secondly, and shockingly in terms of the death toll from the virus, the government last year scrapped a group that included senior cabinet ministers tasked with protecting the UK from a pandemic. It was mothballed by Theresa May, so ministers and officials could focus on Brexit. It was then abolished by Boris Johnson days after he entered number 10 last July as part of his vow to streamline Whitehall. 6 months later, COVID-19 arrived and has since claimed over 62,000 lives so far in the UK. This government must be held accountable for its failures and inaccurate briefings and people suffering from it. And also it should not be allowed just to pass the buck to local authorities for its failures. Newcastle is already under terrible financial strain and without proper funding and resources needed to do the job that they're set to do.
Schofield.
I'm finished.
You're finished. Oh, very well timed. Thank you very much. Now, I understand Councillor Ashby has now finally been able to join the meeting. I believe you know where we are, Councillor Ashby, and you'd indicated you wanted to speak on the issue of COVID-19. Councillor Ashby.
Yes, my system is unmuting. Can you hear me?
I can hear you now.
Good. Thank you very much, Lord Mayor. And thank you to officers in the Cabinet for bringing this timely report to the Council. Today it's been reported that total excess deaths this year are over 65,000, more than the total civilian casualties in the Second World War. So firstly, I'd like to speak for the tens of thousands of older people who died during this pandemic. The government repeatedly says it mourns them, but airbrushes them out, along with responsibility for their deaths in care homes, hospitals and at home, cut off from their loved ones. A care home in my ward started to get ready when the news emerged from China. Unlike the government, they didn't fiddle around with useless chatter about herd immunity or driving to Barnard Castle. They ordered PPE and more iPads so that when their elderly residents were locked down, they could still communicate with their families. If they could work this out, why were there ever shortages within the NHS? Today's newspapers carry the story that under 50s now have a greater chance of dying from an accident than from the virus. But old age pensioners, to draw an arbitrary line, had and have a far higher chance of catching it and dying. And I repeat this because the virus hasn't gone away. So the mixed messages about what some people are seeing as the end of social distancing are deeply unhelpful. If you're older, if you've been shielding, please keep 2 meters away from others and washing your hands, even if it means you still can't hug your grandchildren. To others, if you can work from home, please continue to do so. The announcement yesterday about changes to district centres in Newcastle, which I might or might not have heard, is still in force, I assume, and perhaps the leader can say to catch me up if it's not, although already some on social media are questioning it. The main point of the exercise of encouraging people to use local suppliers by increasing their confidence that it's safe to be out is strongly to be supported. A large proportion of small, locally owned and managed businesses do not have, according to survey information, enough cash reserves to survive for many months after government support stops. But for those still shielding, we thank all the volunteers who've helped them over the last 3 months and hope your kindness will continue to be available to those who need it. And finally, Lord Mayor, let us not forget it's younger people who will carry the financial burden of the catastrophic recession that's already set in. It's a great pity that we would not be doing tonight what might have been done to ease the immediate and long-term unemployment impact on the young, the unskilled and the regions by reskilling and upskilling. Thank you, Lord Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Ashby. Councillor Avery.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Like other members, I'd really like to pay tribute to our staff and our residents. As a member of Health Scrutiny, I've been tremendously impressed by the level of information that's been shared by local partners, the level of clarity of purpose and openness and transparency that we've had from our local health authorities and from health trusts and public health staff, which I think has stood in stark contrast sometimes to national authorities, and I'm very pleased that our local response has very much been led by the science and has been founded in best practice in public health. I would also like to acknowledge that the ward that I have the pleasure to represent, the great honour to represent, Blakelow, has been unusually badly hit by the COVID virus. And we have the unfortunate distinction of having had the largest number of deaths in our care homes. And I want to pay tribute to the Blakelow residents who have gone about their lives and carried on, even despite the loss of their loved ones. And they have followed the guidance, I think, overwhelmingly. There have been a small number of people who have not done what they've been asked to do, but overwhelmingly my residents, those residents who I represent, have followed those rules, even at the time when family members have been dying, even at a time of great loss and great sadness. And I think they and the other residents of the city have really shown us at our best. I would like to ask the leader of the council, though, whether he's concerned about some of the recent changes, specifically relating to distances, which appear not in any sense to have been guided by science and appear, in fact, to be explicitly against the guidance of leading medical authorities and appear more guided by the government's political priorities than by sensible measures which might allow life to go back to as close to normal as it might be possible to do so, and whether he shares my concern that some of these measures potentially could push Newcastle into a more difficult situation than it might otherwise be. Thank you, Lord Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Avery. Councillor Taylor.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah. I would like to add my thanks to the staff and the volunteers across the city who've done such a wonderful job. I have to say, in December last year, at the time of the election, I thought there was nothing that could bring this country together again. But one of the few good things about the COVID epidemic is that it has, and communities have behaved absolutely wonderfully. I've spoken to many local residents in my area, and I haven't found more than a couple who needed any extra support who weren't already being supported by neighbours or friends. So that is at least a good thing. I think this report is overall very good, and particularly the emphasis on a local approach. But there's an awful lot of work to cover with these 7 themes. Obviously, the track, trace and isolate process is absolutely fundamental, as is the support for vulnerable groups and safe practice. And I share Councillor Cott's concern about how confident we can be that this will be ready for the 31st of July, particularly with all these sudden changes of policy by the government. So in the last week, we've lost the app that was supposed to help us with the track and tracing. We've lost the 2-metre rule. And then we've got shops open. We've got schools increasing their numbers, hairdressers, restaurants and hotels opening. It is going to be very difficult. And in particular, the testing, I think, and making sure that we can test in a prompt manner. I was somewhat concerned that there was a letter in the paper last week from a doctor in Durham who'd sent off for testing, and it took 6 days for him to get a response or an answer to his question. And that's really not good enough. We have to be able to turn this around in 24 hours if it's going to work. In reply to Councillor Schofield, I can say Newcastle's actually done an awful lot better than many other areas in the country. OK, the North East has overall had a lot of problems, but Newcastle has done well. And to give an example of that, the hospital trust has started testing all its staff for the antibody, and the current rate is 6%, which I think is the lowest for any health setting in the country. So we do have to be proud that the hospitals have worked very well with social care and the council to make that happen. I am concerned what happens before the 31st of July. With all these changes, we could end up with an outbreak in a school, a department store, a business. And we've only got to look at this meat factory in Wales to see how quickly that can cause an absolute disaster. And we could have a situation where a local school having to close could actually affect a large part of a local estate and have, people who normally would help each other all being in isolation. Just 1 or 2 other questions. One thing that's been raised by me by a resident is the question of toilet facilities in the city centre. And I know most of them aren't in the control of the council, but we do need to make sure that people who can't go out without knowing where the next toilet is are actually able to do the shopping and take part in the activities they want to. I'd like to know more about how we're progressing with the walking and cycling extensions, because if we're going to keep people cycling and walking as they have been, which is another good point of the epidemic, then we have to give them social distance. We have to make sure they can cycle and walk safely and keep apart. And when we're looking at vulnerable people, I think mental health is an absolutely crucial part of this, and I'm disappointed I can't discuss this later in the agenda, because it's not just the effects of lockdown on those who already had mental health problems. It's also new people, single people, bereaved people, those who are self-isolating and scared, young people who are concerned that their education and their careers have been put on hold and have no certainty. So it is an absolutely crucial part of the plan to make sure that those people are supported. Yes, I welcome this report. I do have concerns about just how much we'll be able to do and what the government will do to hinder that again in the future.
Thank you, Councillor Taylor. If we can move on to Councillor Todd. Councillor Todd, can you unmute yourself? Well, we've got the same problem with Councillor Todd, apparently. So can I move on to Councillor Holland? Councillor Holland?
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Yes, thank you, Councillor Forbes, for the report. I greatly welcome it. Like many people, I've despaired at the government's management of this pandemic, particularly at their need to try and centralise all decision makings and acting as though local authorities are less experienced or less capable of responding. We all know this isn't true, as our local response has been led fantastically by our council management team, the leader and the cabinet, and the amazing partnerships we have, particularly with health. I'd like to echo what Councillor Avery said, is that all information from our health services has been so transparent, it's been so informative, it's in complete contrast to government briefings. But fundamentally, the biggest shout out I'd like to give is for our outstanding workforce who've shown their flexibility in changing jobs and covering other jobs, how caring they've been, and also the fantastic communities that we've all had in our wards, the help offered to vulnerable residents and meeting their needs has just been outstanding. So I really welcome this report and think that being responsible for our own outbreak control plan means that we can continue to be responsive, we can focus on those in greatest need and work, most importantly, in collaboration with others. Thank you very much, Lord Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Holland. We've now had the 6 speakers that our standing orders require us to have, and I'm not going to allow anyone else to speak in view of that, how difficult it is to organise this meeting. So can I call on Councillor Forbes to reply?
Thank you, Lord Mayor, and thank you everybody for all of those points and questions. I'll do my best to summarise as many as I can. Firstly, Councillor Cott, thank you. And by the way, congratulations too on your election as Leader of the Opposition. I remember the joy when that happened to me many years ago. Much of what's been going on, in fact, virtually all of what's been going on in the city, I think is outside of the normal realm of party politics. You know, we've just seen a real need to get on, do a job and deliver for our communities. And of course, I would welcome any questions or any alternative suggestions that the opposition would wish to put forward. Hopefully, you'll see the emerging economic plans and big infrastructure changes that we're making for the city. We're making a lot of changes to prioritise space for walking and cycling, and that means that there will be some dramatic changes to district shopping centres and neighbourhoods in the next couple of weeks. as well as further changes in the city centre. And I know that members in those particular wards are being spoken to by my colleague, Councillor Ainsley, about what those changes may mean for them. But I really hope that members will work in the spirit of which those changes are intended to accelerate the amount of walking and cycling space available right across our city, so that we don't go back to people using their cars, particularly at a time when public transport is still a real challenge in terms of social distancing. And you're absolutely right, Nick, to talk about the finances being very tough. Of course, local government, unlike central government, has to set balanced budgets every year. And the reason why we've become increasingly reliant on commercial income as a council is because we've had, over the last decade, a very significant loss in revenue support grant from successive governments, cumulative £330 million. I don't make a party political point here, just to say that the balance of the council's funding has become much more reliant on earned income over that last decade, and therefore, inevitably, that's having a consequential knock-on for the current revenue budget. The biggest challenge that we face in making sure that the test and trace and isolate system works effectively is in getting good data from the government. And at the moment, the data that we're getting is not really fit for purpose. At the moment, what we're simply getting is a list of the people number of people who've tested positive, a number of people who've had tests in the city and a number of people who've tested positive. We don't yet, or at least last time I looked a day or so ago, we're not yet getting any geographically identifiable information, which would help us immensely in terms of knowing exactly where there were outbreaks of the virus in the city. And that's one of the things that we've got to get right very quickly if we're able to make sure that the lockdown occurs in a safe fashion. And I can say that in addition to the work that we're doing with the national track and trace system, we're working very closely with Newcastle hospitals and the universities to try to expand the amount of testing that we're able to do locally, because the most important thing about the tests are that we get them turned around very quickly and get the results very quickly. That's the best way that we can identify where the virus is in our city and move to contain it as quickly as possible. Councillor Schofield, thank you for your comments. I would absolutely echo your comments about the senior management team. I can honestly say that I have never seen such a cohesive and hard-working senior management team in any organisation ever. And the way that they've really pulled together and gone not the extra mile, but the extra marathon to do what's been necessary has been absolutely magnificent. Compare and contrast that with our Prime Minister, who I think would be out of depth in a puddle. And yet the thing that I'm most concerned about, and this is for all staff in the organisation, is that we understand the extra stresses and strains that people are under and allow people time off and holidays. Most people haven't had a holiday now for getting on for 3 or 4 months, and it's essential that our staff feel supported to do that and to take those breaks so that we don't have a build-up of poor mental health amongst our staff teams. We're in this for the long haul. Councillor Ashby raised the point around confusing messaging, and I would absolutely agree that what's been coming out from government has been confusing and muddled on an almost daily basis. It's been very difficult for people to understand. And of course, what we had yesterday was the announcement about changes to social distancing, which don't actually come into effect for another couple of weeks. But most people have heard the message that social distancing is over. It's not. And it's really important that we continue to keep up the important messages around, firstly, maintaining social distancing and also maintaining good hand hygiene as the best ways in which we can protect ourselves and each other against the further spread of the virus. Our approach is to try to encourage people to shop locally wherever they can, which is why we're doing work not just in the city centre, but in our neighbourhood shopping centres. And that's why we are seeing that work accelerating. And Councillor Ashby also raises an important point around the need to commemorate the people that we've lost as a city through the coronavirus. And I've had some early discussions with a number of our faith leaders around what an appropriate commemoration or memorial might be. And I would welcome suggestions from all members about what a more permanent memorial might be in the city and what that might look like and where it could be located. We might think, for example, about planting some trees in one of our parks. We might think about a plaque. We might think about something else. So if anybody has any ideas, I'd be very grateful to hear from you about what they might be. Councillor Avery, I think I've made the point around how following the rules is the best way that we can protect ourselves and each other. But I would also agree with you that many people have made great sacrifices. We all know of friends or family members or others in our communities who have had to cancel major events, who've lost out on significant birthday parties, who've not been able to have the weddings that they've been planning for a while. And sadly, in many cases, family members or friends unable to attend funerals of loved ones. And that's been hugely distressing for people. And I want to pay tribute to the enormous sacrifices made by the people of this city. That's why it's utterly insensitive when the Prime Minister's special advisor so flagrantly and blatantly broke the rules in the way that he did without any follow-up or consequence. And I know that's caused a huge amount of anger right across the city, not just from those who themselves have suffered great sacrifice and pain. And on Councillor Taylor's point, I think I've probably covered the test and trace issues, but there's an ongoing debate around exactly how we would choose to lock down an area and what powers we would have in order to do so. That continues to be challenging. It continues to be something that we work with government. Hopefully a lockdown would be the very last recourse that we would have to get to, because hopefully if we have very fast testing in place, we're then able to encourage people to self-isolate and make sure that everybody affected is tested as quickly as possible, avoiding the need for a lockdown. That's the intention. And on Councillor Holland's point, the outbreak control plan is something that is obviously going to be subject to a great amount of interest, but our intention in bringing it forward is to keep people safe in the city and ensure that we recover from the lockdown in a way that gets our economy back on its feet, gets people back into jobs, and ensures that everybody can feel safe and secure in their community, whatever they do. Thank you, Lord Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Ford. Does Council agree to receive the report?
Agreed.
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 I'm not hearing any no's. There are any, put them in the chat.
Agreed.
Thank you. Okay, the report is received then. I now move on to item 9, which is the proposed changes to the Wellbeing for Life Board. Again, I'll call on Councillor Forbes to move the report, and it will be seconded by Councillor McCarthy, I believe. Councillor Forbes.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I'll try and be a little quicker with this report. The Wellbeing for Life Board was established back in May 2013 as the forum where leaders from local health and care systems work together to improve the health of the population. But since then, the policy landscape has moved on, and the government have both changed the requirements for health and wellbeing boards and introduced new functions. So we've undertaken a review of the board over the last year, and there's been broad consensus that it needs to be reshaped and repurposed, and with revised membership. That means moving towards more of a select committee style approach, looking more about citizen engagement, significantly, I think, building in more elected member engagement in the work of the board, and also making annual reports to health scrutiny and to full council. The various proposals that are set out in the report tonight have been approved by both the board itself and Constitutional Committee. But having reflected on the proposed changes, the board, which met briefly in shadow form last week, has also discussed the need to more accurately reflect its role in achieving the shared ambitions in the context of the COVID crisis. So it's therefore proposed that the board is renamed as the City Futures Board. That means that the board would have responsibility for not just the local outbreak control plan and the integration of the health and social care system, but also the economic recovery of the city, pulling together into one place our work around public health, tackling inequalities, and promoting economic and inclusive growth. And the previous report on this agenda has set out the work that we've been doing on the control plan, but this would give a clear governance framework for that work to be taken forward. The board is well placed to fulfil this broader role by temporarily co-opting representatives from other organisations who have a key role to play in the recovery, such as the police, the wider business community and transport. So the City Futures Board will continue to fulfil its statutory responsibilities under the Health and Care Act, but will also assume the additional temporary role of the COVID Recovery Board with immediate effect. And Lord Mayor, I can just finish by saying that I've spoken to all of the partners across the city about this. They're all in agreement that this is the right way forward. And I think it absolutely consolidates the partnership work that we have in the city, both over the last 3 months, but significantly as we move forward to reshape the economy of the future. And I move the recommendations. Thank you.
Lord Mayor's been disconnected, Nick. We've got a technical problem.
Does this mean I have to sing a song now?
Right, we are. We
can mute you, Nick, on that one.
Myself and the officers who are with me have been disconnected slightly. We don't know why, but we're back with us now. Are you all with us? Everybody with us? Yes.
And I saved the song as well.
Nick, I didn't hear a word you said, but I guess that everybody in the meeting heard you. Is that correct?
I don't think they want to hear it again, Lord Mayor.
Quite sure. I'm not quite on my screen here yet. I'll be with you in a minute.
We can see you.
Yeah. Okay. I've got the chat up again. So, have you finished, Councillor Forbes? Yes. Right. And is the report seconded by Councillor McCarthy, I believe?
It is, Lord Mayor. Thank you. Lord Mayor, I think this is straightforward. I think this is about widening the remit for what was the Wellbeing for Life Board and will be the city's futures board. Lord Mayor, the leader of council, explained about the full review, the full discussion at Constitutional Committee. All of this was before lockdown, so we did have really thorough conversations. So the proposals that are before us tonight have had wide discussions to make sure that they're right. And I think this will remain the strategic partnership for the city. We've heard tonight, Lord Mayor, in the COVID update, the issues that some of the issues the board will take forward in relation to COVID. And I think widening the remit to make sure that it covers health, economic and social well-being means that it takes on a broader role than it has done before. And I think it will help us all in moving forward the recovery plans that many of us are keen to develop, and it will formally support the work of the Director of Public Health in delivering the COVID plan. So as part of this, we are proposing to set up an elected member advisory board. We'll probably meet for an hour before the formal meetings of the City's Futures Board. And we're also proposing to reinvigorate a report to health scrutiny. I used to take to health scrutiny a report of the work of the Wellbeing for Life Board, so we're trying to set that up again and make sure that that happens. And I think bringing that also to Council an annual report of the work of the board will make sure that the work of the board is more effectively shared and that we have wider engagement of members. So I'm very happy to second the proposal that's before us. Thank you, Lord Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor McCarthy. A number of people have indicated they wish to speak. So can we start with Councillor Hart, please? Councillor Huddart. We're not getting Councillor Huddart, so we'll come back to her. So Councillor Taylor,
Thank you, Lord Mayor. No, I do think that the idea of the board is correct. The aims are correct. It did need some work to look at it in a different way, and I have certainly no problem with that. I think at this stage, health scrutiny will need more than an annual report, and I would hope that we would at least get an update, perhaps quarterly, about what's going on, because it is such a critical period. I think my only concern is with the name change. I really don't find City Futures Board says much about what it's actually aiming to do. I think you actually dealt with the issue when the name was changed from Health and Wellbeing Board to the Wellbeing for Life Board, because I think we'd all accept that well-being means economic well-being, social well-being, as well as mental and physical well-being. So you already covered all the issues that you want to cover with the name that we have, and I'm not convinced that a change of name is essential, but obviously that's up to the board to talk through and decide. But overall, I think this is a good report, and look forward to getting the updates from the board in the future.
Thank you, Councillor Taylor. Councillor Ellis. Councillor Ellis, can you unmute?
Thank you. Yes, I'm here. Lord Mayor, we live in a society where people are left behind. The cycle of inequality that the report talks of are the day-to-day struggles of people living in deprivation, where poor mental health is exacerbated by poor physical health, living conditions, work and education opportunities, and barriers as well to accessing necessary benefits. I think we've grown used to health improving as it did throughout the 20th century. So it's shocking to read recently in the Marmot Review, 10 years on, that actually from 2011, improvements in life expectancy slowed dramatically, and they even fell for some deprived communities. As Marmot puts it, when a society has large social and economic inequalities, there are large inequalities in health. The health of the population is not just a matter of how well the health service is funded and functions, important as that is. Health is closely linked to the conditions in which the people are born, grow, live, work, and age, and inequalities in power, money, and resources. Just to demonstrate how wide-reaching this is. The COVID-19 crisis has actually been said to hold a mirror up to these disparities. Persons more than twice as likely to die from coronavirus if they live in a deprived area. And there are about 66,000 people in Newcastle who live in localities that are in the 10% most deprived areas in the country. And those living in these areas can expect to have more physical and mental health issues and die sooner than those in affluent areas. So it's understandable that people in these communities are feeling left behind. So I'm glad to see in the proposal there are plans for more citizen engagement, and I sincerely hope that it brings the voices of disenfranchised people to the fore. People do seem to be talking more lately, and just as neighbours in the street are finding ways to work together to ensure people are not left without, we need to continue to ensure that the organisations that contribute to our well-being do the same. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ellis. Can we go back to Councillor Huddart? Are you with us, Councillor Huddart?
Hello, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Oh, good. I thought I was just talking to my cat there. Just to say something almost very similar to what Laura Ellis said. I was lucky enough yesterday to attend a webinar at the LGA from, I've forgotten, he's Sir Michael Marmot, isn't he? Not Lord, he's Sir Michael Marmot. And he reckons that if people stick to his principles, his 5 domains, tackling things like poor housing, getting more green spaces, better food, etc., that the health and well-being of the nation will be much better. He also reckons that it will solve any future problems, any future epidemics that we have, like COVID. but he produced some interesting statistics and charts, which I've been told should be made available for people. And as soon as I get them, because they had some very interesting facts and figures about who the people are who are at risk, then I'll make sure that everybody gets those. It is important that we look at the wider implications of health, that we look at the epidemiology, we follow people like Marmot and the WHO. When I mention WHO, can I quickly mention something else, Lord Mayor? As you might remember, I put in a motion a few months ago about this being the year, the International Year of Nursing. Well, it did actually happen on May the 12th, and organisations like WHO had some webinars and seminars and things online, and looked at how many health professionals had died during the pandemic. And I hadn't realised how many had died across the whole world, because they were talking worldwide. But one of the things they did mention was that, I mean, we think we're bad with 40,000 nursing vacancies here. There were 100,000 in Spain. And that's probably because, in part, that a lot of Spanish nurses came here to work because of the recession that they had in their country. And also, just you might be interested to know that at National Nursing Day, the Queen made a telephone call, and it came to Kathleen McCourt in Newcastle because of her position in the Royal College. And a lot of people might have missed that, but some people were very pleased about it. Thank you very much for your time, Lord Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Huddart. Councillor Mendelson.
Thanks, Lord Mayor. I think I'm probably going to say something along the lines of what others have said, but they are very important issues. And the Wellbeing for Life Board has been a valuable forum since it was set up, which enables the key organisations across the city to work together on the health care and well-being of Newcastle residents. As a member of the Council's Health Scrutiny Committee, I've been able to see the highly effective partnership working that has developed as the agencies address us on health issues. One of the most notable, which I think has already been referred to, is the way our social care section in the council has worked so closely with Newcastle Hospital Trust, and this has proved particularly beneficial to Newcastle during the COVID crisis. So of course it seems sensible that this body should oversee the city's continuing approach to management of COVID and its ongoing impacts of social and economic. And again, it's been referred to, and we're all aware of the stark inequalities in health across the city, which COVID has very sadly highlighted. The differences in life expectancy, healthy life expectancy, and in life-limiting conditions and poorer mental health. We only need to look at statistics between, for example, Elsick and Gosforth wards to know the stark differences that exist. Last year, Health Scrutiny delivered a report to the Wellbeing for Life Board about inequalities in access to health by our BAME communities, following detailed research, talking to local people and gathering evidence from health agencies and community groups. The report highlighted a number of concerns and offered suggestions for improvement, which included better access to information, more flexible and targeted services, and the need to work much more closely with local initiatives and community representatives. This will hopefully play a part in the approach of the new board, taking to the disproportionate impact we know that BAME people have faced by COVID. We also know that access to high quality education from a very early age and skills, good jobs, decent housing all play a key role in the health and well-being of our residents. And so it's absolutely sensible that the new City Futures Board will bring together health and care and economic and social partnerships to work together on redesign, looking at these hugely important issues. And I hope this will include employers and trade unions alongside other bodies in those areas who are vital to this. Finally, increased engagement with the people of Newcastle and with elected members is very welcome, as is the delivery of an annual report to the City Council. I'm sure that our very able cabinet leads will also continue to play the vital role in the new board. So I fully endorse the report. I look forward to seeing the much needed impact that the changing focus will hopefully provide. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mendelson. Councillor Cott.
Thank you very much, Lord Mayor, and I'm interested in the comments from colleagues there. I think this is a really important agenda, and I'm looking very much forward to being part of that, sitting on this new City Futures Board myself. And I think it will be an important place for all partners working together. I think strategically it's well placed to achieve quite a lot, particularly in relation to the issues that Councillor Forbes mentioned about public health, equalities and inclusive growth. But I also think it does need to take into consideration important work streams around education, training, skills, and I'm sure it will do so. It needs to be something which engages with the public, and I think we need to think about how that might work. I take Councillor Taylor's point into consideration here about the name. On the face of it, it doesn't really seem to be a very public facing name, but maybe it can be. Maybe we can work on how that looks. I also noted Councillor Huddett's points around the well-being and health agenda, which I think are also very significant. When you have a board like this with such a huge remit, there's always a possibility that something important slips through the net, and I don't want that to happen with this. So we need to keep a careful eye on that, and those of us that are part of it, as well as those who are perhaps coordinating the agenda for us a little bit, will need to make very sure and very certain that important things don't get left out. Health and well-being is really very important. This is not about forgetting about those things, but if this augmented role leads to something missing out, then I think we do have a problem. So it's a word of caution, but I'm very supportive of this, and I look forward to being part of it.
Thank you, Councillor Cott. Councillor Higgins. Councillor Higgins. We're not getting Councillor Higgins. So Councillor Holland.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I fully support this report and the changes in the membership name and role of this, the Wellbeing Board for Life. The new board, I think, will work on a local response and prevention and identification and management of the COVID outbreaks, and bring together health, economic recovery and a social plan to ensure sustainable recovery for our city. As I've already said in my last contribution, we do have an excellent history of working in partnership with a wide range of professional, talented and very locally focused agencies and organisations, including lots of voluntary sector organisations. I think bringing everyone together as the City Futures Board will focus the work further and will, in my opinion, result in better outcomes for our residents, businesses, organisations and ultimately our communities and neighbourhoods. Thank you very much, Lord Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Holland. We've now had our 6 speakers, so can I go back to Councillor Forbes to reply?
Thank you, Lord Mayor, and thank you everybody who's contributed to a very thoughtful debate. Firstly, in terms of governance and process, Councillor Taylor's point around updating quarterly is an important one. I think it's important to remember that there will both be a member reference group to support the work of this board, which will be an opportunity for members to get involved and ask questions and make sure that points that they want to raise are on the agenda. But also, we'll be doing regular updates for Cabinet and to City Council, and of course to Health Scrutiny too. So I think there'll be plenty of opportunities to make sure that members are fully up to date with all of the issues that are developing over the next few months. And in terms of the relationship with this board, one of the concerns that I've always had is that people tend to think of health policy as separate from economic policy. And yet we know from the work of not just recently people like Michael Marmot, but going way back to the Black Report in the early 1980s, that health and wealth are integrally combined, and people from lower socioeconomic backgrounds, disadvantaged backgrounds, tend to suffer poorer health, shorter life expectancy, and a greater length of their later years spent with some kind of life-limiting condition. So it's absolutely essential that we do what we can to put in place the foundation stones for everybody to live a long, healthy, fulfilled life as much as possible. And that starts for me with early years. It then goes into working conditions and ensuring that people have good job with good pay and conditions and can feel they can contribute to society. And that needs to be followed through in terms of good quality public services to support people at the challenging times when they need extra help throughout their lives. All of the 6 Marmot recommendations in Fair Society, Healthy Lives have been followed through in policy reflections in this council. And I hope we can use that kind of approach, blending it with the WHO framework and also the UN Sustainable Development Goals, to ensure we really do take a population-based approach to improving health, tackling inequalities, promoting fairness and equality, and ensuring that they are not seen as separate things to economic growth by our wider partners. Because one of the failings, I think, of the British political system is that it sometimes expects the public sector to pick up the strain for tackling inequalities, when actually it's everybody's business and needs to be woven into everybody's work, regardless of sector, organisation or employer type. That's why I'm particularly pleased that this board brings together the work of public services and public agencies across the city alongside various representatives from business and the economic sector.
Can you wind up, please, Councillor Forbes?
Yes, Lord Mayor. And I would also say that I think there is a specific issue that we need to understand more about why Black and minority ethnic communities have been disproportionately affected by COVID-19. And I'm sure that's something that Councillor Ali in her new cabinet role will want to take a significant interest in, as will we all, given the significance of that for the populations of our city. But otherwise, Lord Mayor, I hope members can support the recommendations and look forward to further positive engagement in the work of the board through the various routes that they have to feed into it.
Thank you, Councillor Forbes. Is the report agreed?
Agreed.
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 I'm hearing agreed. If anyone agreed, put no in the chat, please. See if we have to go to a vote. Okay, I'm judging that the report is agreed, so thank you, colleagues. If we can move on to the item 10, which is the development and allocations plan. You've all had an email about this, but can I remind you again, in debating this, please do not refer to any specific sites in the city to avoid prejudice in any planning application. So on that note, I'll call on Councillor Bell to move the report, and it's going to be seconded, I believe, by Councillor Stevenson. Councillor Bell.
Thank you, Lord Mayor, and good evening. This report relates to Part 2 of our local plan, the Development Allocations Plan, otherwise known as the DAP. The next stage of the local plan provides the detail needed to support our spatial vision, strategic objectives, and scale of growth in the core strategy. Part 1 of the core strategy and urban core plan was prepared jointly with Gateshead and was adopted in March 2015. This sets out our growth ambitions, identifying the new build of 21,000 new homes and provide 14,000 jobs in Newcastle by 2030. Since the adoption of the core strategy and urban core plan, approximately 7,000 new homes have been delivered in the city. Newcastle is a growing city. More people are coming to live here and the businesses are investing, creating jobs for the future. The Development Allocations Plan is Newcastle's Part 2 and will support our growth, ambitions and strategic policies set out in Part 1. That's very important, Lord Mayor, that we see these as a 2-part plan. The DAP will support the COVID recovery. It provides a range of policies, including those on transport and open space, which will allow our city to become cleaner and greener, and more space will be given to pedestrians and cyclists in the city centre. Sustainable travel policies will allow priority for pedestrians and cyclists in areas supporting the city centre's economic recovery. New open space provisions is required and standards are set out, and there are also policies on protection and provision of new green infrastructure and biodiversity. For our city to grow effectively, we need to balance the needs of all of our residents. We must plan for housing, transport, access to employment sites, and access to services, leisure opportunities, and open spaces for health and exercise, so people can enjoy a good quality of life. The plan sets out more detailed policies that will be used to help make decisions on planning applications. It takes forward and updates saved policies from 1998 Unity Development Plan, the Benwell-Scotswood Area Action Plan, and the Walker Riverside Area Action Plan. It sets out allocations of housing and employment sites that will guide future development in Newcastle, helping to meet the city's needs for new homes and jobs, as our population grows alongside people living longer and more families moving into the area. The plan includes designations such as retail centre boundaries and sites for environmental protection. Our focus has always been on prioritising bringing forward development on brownfield sites and preserving valued green belt land, and we remain committed to this. The plan does not include a review of green belt boundaries, and no new allocations are proposed within green belt. Together, both the Core Strategy and Urban Core Plan and the Development Allocations Plan will provide strategic and detailed planning policies which will help manage development across the city. We consulted on the DAP in 2017 and 2018, and following the government inspection, most recently in December 2019 to February 2020. We listened to comments and made changes to the plan in response of comments received. Following public examination, the DAP has been considered capable of being found sound, and the planning inspector, which is a major positive step forward, and I now propose we adopt the DAP to set a clear policy framework for the future. Thank you, Lord Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Bell. I'm going to take, in view of the fact that we're going well for time, I'm going to take everyone who's indicated they want to speak on this issue, but no more than that. And providing, of course, we do still keep well to time. So, first of all, Councillor Taylor.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I just had a query, really. There are a number of points that the inspector raised about this issue, and I just wanted to check whether his concerns have been incorporated into the plan that we're agreeing.
Can I just butt in, Councillor Taylor? I do apologise.
Sorry?
I do apologise. Can I just butt in here? Can I have the report seconded, please?
Thank you, Lord Mayor.
Oh, sorry.
Yes. Thank you, Lord Mayor. I'd very much like to second the report, and I would like to reserve the right to speak, please.
Thank you, Councillor Stevenson. I do beg your pardon, Councillor Taylor. Please start again.
Okay. Thank you, Lord Mayor. As I said, there are a number of points that the inspector raised on green sustainability issues and others that I just wanted to find out whether those changes have been put into the new plan that we're agreeing today. They did seem to be quite sensible from what I saw, but it wasn't clear from the report that we had whether those issues had been looked at and included. Thank you.
Yeah, sorry about that. Councillor Barnes.
Yeah, thank you, Lord Mayor. I note that in the development allocation plan, it addresses sites which are currently in use as open space and would have the potential to be developed for housing. And it explains that an open space assessment will be required to assess the impact of the loss of open space in the locality of such sites. So I'd just like to ask how the open space policies in the plan will ensure that open space is protected. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Barnes. Councillor Ashby.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. This document has been a long time in the making. Its elements have been thoroughly discussed and examined over the last 5 years, and we have a duty to approve a framework for a local plan. But in doing so, we must be aware that it aims to build a better yesterday rather than a better tomorrow. Already, the ways we live, work, create wealth are in flux. Literally today, the retail heart of our city is under threat, with the possibility of Eldon Square and its 150 businesses being shuttered again. We're introducing, albeit temporarily perhaps, major changes in the way people use district centres. Businesses have been forced into new ways of working, and many are considering where their people have to be and how they interact. Will there be need for major office complex in the future? The challenges ahead will be even greater than those of the last 3 months if the existential threat of climate change is to be tackled, all of which will impact on the way land and resources are used, perhaps in ways not evident at this instant. So while approving these proposals, we should consider that they are work in progress and be prepared to revisit them as circumstances change, which appears inevitably they will. Thank you, Lord Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Ashby. Councillor Avery.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. And I'd agree that this has been a long-running and very thorough process, and the level of consultation has really been really significant. But my question is that is to Councillor Belter, if he could give a bit more detail about what specific practical differences it will make for planning decisions to have this policy versus if this policy was not approved today and we were not adopting the DAP. What difference would that make for planning committee decisions?
Thank you, Councillor Avery. Councillor Kane.
Yes, thank you, Lord Mayor. Like Councillor Taylor, I was very I noticed it was very obvious that the inspector was pulling the council up on climate change, climate resilience, green infrastructure, green spaces, sustainable transport and biodiversity. That's a very wide range of environmental issues. And given, you know, the fact that the council, we're trying to be a sustainable council, I think it is very disappointing that the inspector points out these weaknesses in a plan, and it really begs the question as to whether the aspirations of the administration are actually being embedded into the policies and the fabric of everything the council does. And obviously this being part of a local plan and will shape the city for years to come, if not decades, it is really important to get this right. I would like to see these issues being way above the bar rather than being below the bar and requiring the inspector to sort of chivvy the council up to the minimum standard.
Thank you, Councillor Kane. Councillor Jackie Robinson.
Thank you, Lord Mayor, and I welcome this report. But I would like to ask a question. How confident are we that this will help our city with our climate change ambitions for the future? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Robinson. Quite a few people obviously asking that. Councillor Shorten.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I received this report with some grave concerns, to be frank, particularly in the Outer West, given that despite significant claim consultation of residents, of groups, people like the Save Newcastle Wildlife, Cities for Trust, etc., then apparently and appearingly it seems that many aspects have been completely disregarded. And in fact, this report comes not just a little late in connection with our climate emergency and future aspirations, but it doesn't go clearly very far. I'm particularly concerned at the local implications, particularly in the Outer West in my own ward, given the lack of space and the fact that open space parks in Chapel, we don't have a park, are not being met. The current standards, never mind future standards. I'm also very, very well aware that the previous standards recommended by Councillor Flynn, the previous, were much better, closer to local people. And in this COVID emergency, health and well-being just as the economy, cannot be separated out from a future recovery. And so I would ask that the council closely engage, more deeply than ever before, with residents, real consultations, with active groups, and listen and prove that the listening council will actually put actions into words. I look forward to a positive response. Thank you, Lord Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Shorten. Councillor Hobson.
Thank you, Lord Mayor, and thank you, Councillor Bell, for the very detailed report. My question is in relation to housing, and I note that the report states that the DAP will support the delivery of strategic growth and help rebalance the housing stock. And I was just wondering if you'd care to elaborate on how that will be delivered through the DAP and what would be the implications if we didn't have it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hobson. Councillor Stevenson, you'd reserve the right to speak.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Thank you. Well, I think this report and the Inspector's responsive report has been, as has already been said, consulted on very widely over many, many years. I remember, as many of us do, the original Benwell and Scotswood Area Action Plan and the Walker Riverside. The adoption of this plan tonight will be a major step forward for the city, as it provides direction on development, which will also support the recovery of COVID. Newcastle has a great
We're getting some noise on you.
Yes, I know. Yes, it's not from me.
Okay, sorry about that. Carry on.
Thank you. Newcastle has a great future, and the DAP will help deliver our growth strategy, as been said, providing updated policies to manage development and protect the natural and built environment. The comprehensive new suite of updated documents includes many new policies which will enhance, update and support things like flexible housing and developments and bring more quality homes in our communities. It also includes policies promoting sustainable travel to enhance and deliver an integrated transport network to support this sustainable growth. And it also sets out the provision of housing and employment allocations in existing neighbourhoods to help provide modern homes and employment throughout many areas of the city. Some new policies that will enhance applications and support developers and ourselves include on major developments things like digital infrastructure and electronic communication networks to be provided within the planning, nationally prescribed spatial standards in homes. Many of us in planning are aware of concerns around that, and also much more accessible and adaptable homes, and indeed level thresholds and other enhancements to properties within the housing sector. All of these things to help us improve developments of all kinds within our city. So I would support the adoption of this plan as we work through the plan to provide what Newcastle needs going forward in the future throughout with the developments and the houses and the communities, with an infrastructure providing them that will support the best we can in modern society. Thank you, Lord Mayor. I second the report.
Thank you, Councillor Stevenson. I've taken 8 speakers there. I'm not going to take any more, but I call on Councillor Bell to reply. A number of questions have been put there, Councillor Bell.
It has indeed, Lord Mayor, but I just think that this goes to show that this report has been well scrutinised over the many years, and even at the 11th hour, it's still being scrutinised by the amount of interest, and quite rightly the interest that's been shown in it. I'll try to take them one at a time and go through them in the same order. If I do forget anything, please let the questioner come back to me, please. Councillor Taylor, have the points been taken in by the inspector Well, indeed, I can actually say that they have. What we actually seen was there was a summary of all the consultation comments received, and the council's response was published in the consultation feedback reports on the draft DAP and on the pre-submission DAP. Consultation responses were received and have been taken into account at every stage during the preparation, and were considered by the planning inspector as part of the examination. So the point that you're making is, did the planning inspector make any more recommendations? Well, both the policies and the evidence have been updated where necessary. So I think that probably answers your questions. Councillor Barnes, I've got that many papers on the table, and I'm actually glad that it is a virtual meeting. Councillor Barnes, you came in on open space, and yes, well, Newcastle has a range of open space across the city, which forms part of our green infrastructure network. We all believe that it's important to retain open space and provide new open space as the city's population grows. The DAP includes policies to protect existing open space, but also provide new open space in line with the open space standards. Open space which is afforded protection, so open space which is afforded protection within the city are designated on the policies map. New provision of open space will be required as part of the new development, and where there are existing deficiencies in quantity or access to open space, they will come through on all plan applications for new housing, and they'll be continue to be assessed against the council's policies for requiring new or enhanced open space. And the larger sites, of course, will be master planned. So I hope that answers the question for you, Councillor Barnes. Councillor Ashby, you said that's been a long time in the making, and let's make it better tomorrow. Well, I totally agree with you. That's why I'm a little bit confused when we get turned around and said that's been a long time making, but some people think we should take longer. We need to move now. We really do. We've had reports tonight about the COVID crisis that we've been going through and been managing. Now, I want to put on record the fact that we've seen sad loss of life, and people are still suffering from this horrible COVID crisis that we're going through. And it's when you don't want to belittle anybody's death in the family or anybody that's still suffering, but it does turn from a health crisis into a financial crisis. And there's something that's relevant about building a better tomorrow, because I jotted down some notes, and it's on the UK GDP, which has fell in April, and it's the biggest UK ever seen, almost 3 times larger than last month. The World Trade Organization is predicting that the decline will likely exceed the trade slump brought on by the global financial crisis of 2008 and 9. Also, COVID could shrink world trade by 32%. That's on par with a reduction between 1929 and 32, the time of the Great Depression. That's what we could be heading to, and that's why it's important that we get this plan in place so that we can make sure that people have the confidence to come and invest in Newcastle, but also that they have the confidence to live here as well and raise their family. So we need to have quality communities for them to live in. Plus also, I'll be going on in another answer about the life expectancy and the fact that residents are living longer as well. So it's a very important point that you raised, Councillor Ashby, and that's why you should support this document tonight. Councillor Avery, again about planning committee. I think my colleague, Councillor Hazel Stevenson, has commented on the planning committee already, but there is a couple of things that we should bear in mind about the report. And I'd like to take them in 2 sections about why it actually helps. One on transport and one on the green side. So within the DAP, what you see is you've got policy supporting making Newcastle a safer and more sustainable city. We've got transport policies which promote sustainable travel and support the delivery of changes in pedestrian and cycle movements, which will lead to a reduction in carbon emissions. Also, there will be more space for pedestrians and cyclists. The DAP contains pedestrian and cyclist movement policies, which require pedestrians and cycle connectivity between developments. We don't have that at this moment in time. The DAP transport policy supports sustainable travel choices, which will aid recovery, supporting people to make safer journeys of walking or cycling into the urban core. And the green side, which is policies will support making Newcastle a greener city. The DAP open space and natural environment policy require provision and set standards for open space, sports, recreational facilities, and also require green infrastructure. New developments will be expected to provide the necessary open space in accordance with the new standards. Councillor Cairns, carrying on the same subject, which is the green side of the DAP, but also onto what we have is a climate change, the climate change agenda, which you know that the City Council does take very, very seriously. So what we've got within the DAP, which is the main policies probably within the DAP for this to help us with the climate change agenda, is one I've just mentioned, the pedestrian and cycle movements, which requires developments to provide safe, convenient, attractive and continuous pedestrian and cycle links to key facilities and services, but also demonstrate that new developments are within acceptable walking and cycling distance of key local facilities. It also, public transport as part of the DAP, requires major developments to facilitate the use of public transport and designated park and ride facilities. Design within the DAP requires climate measures to be incorporated into developments and to address the issues that we have there. Lord Mayor, I could go on because there is more within the DAP on the climate agenda. Environmental health impacts on the development, so that requires developments to mitigate impacts and improve the air quality. Flood risk and water management gives consideration to immediate and future flood risk, both on the site and elsewhere, requiring a range of measures, including SUDS, so that's sustainable urban drainage schemes to be brought in. Green infrastructure provision aims to protect and enhance green infrastructure for climate mitigation, among other benefits of the DAP. The infrastructure will be required to incorporate climate change mitigation measures. Trees and landscaping includes a focus on the use of new trees and landscaping features to reduce, mitigate runoff and flood risks. And open space, back to what other colleagues have mentioned tonight, requires protection and provision of new open space, setting standards for parks and recreation, play space, natural green spaces, amenity green space and allotments, which will be used alongside the infrastructure policies. Lord Mayor, I think there's quite a lot there that's contained, which I hope answers Councillor Avery and Councillor Cairns' question. Councillor Robinson on climate change within the DAP, we have a plan that clearly, sorry, it wasn't climate change, it was, yes it was, sorry. It clearly sets out the expectations which I've just went through from the developers. It'll help to contribute to addressing climate change. It does promote more sustainable modes of transport and travel, which will help reduce the carbon emissions, which I've already mentioned. It will require the developers to provide walking and cycling connections so that developments improve the network and provide key links to local facilities and services. The DAP also, policies within the DAP will help contribute to addressing the climate change and policies on green infrastructure, as I've mentioned in the last two answers. Open space, biodiversity and flood management will all help Newcastle be more sustainable in a green city. Councillor Shorten, I do want to go back to this one and spend some time, because this is part of it that said that what consultation has been taken and should we listen, and are we really a listening city? I've got to go back to some of my notes on here because the consultation has been that lengthy. I just want to make sure that we actually have everything in place, because I dare say that you'll want to feed this back to your residents. So just to recap, the public consultation actually is taking place at each stage of the plan. A draft plan preparation stage in 2017 and pre-submission plan preparation stage of 2018, and on the inspector's main modifications, so it goes back to Councillor Wendy Taylor's contribution right at the start, between 19 and 20. The consultation was carried out in accordance with a statement of community involvement and involved a range of measures, including having drop-ins for councillors prior to the draft plan and pre-submission plan, sending emails or letters to all contacts held on the local plan consultation database, publishing the DAP and relevant documents on the council's website, publishing a press statement in the journal at each consultation stage, regular social media updates on the council's Twitter and Facebook throughout the consultations, placing display boards at Newcastle City Library, Gosford Shopping Centre, East End Customer Service Centre and the Outer West Customer Service Centre at the draft DAP consultation stages, hosting staff consultation events at the City Library. As a matter of fact, Lord Mayor, this is where I do actually take great umbrage in this, is the fact that the consultation has been noted and it went way above what is actually stipulated that we should have done. So we have listened to people, we have listened to the inspector, and we've certainly amended so that we can have a plan that everybody should be able to accept tonight. Councillor Hobson, on housing sites, I do believe that we have probably covered most of them, but the housing sites and indeed the employment sites are so important to us, and especially for the future. But they're clearly identified, and the developers welcome the clarity that's actually given within the report. That's what we have seen. But it does actually meet the needs of our population within the various designations that we've allowed. So it'll show areas where we need to provide these, and also it'll show areas where our ageing population could have greater access to some of the requirements. There will be diversity within the housing. We will be able to make sure that there's space strategies within the housing. We will also ensure that the housing needs are met for our ageing population, which is so important with the percentage of older residents that we will have and the life expectancy of these residents rising on a daily basis. Lord Mayor, I think I've covered everything with, I hope I have. One thing I'd just like to do in closing is to turn around and just go back to COVID and why it's so important that we actually help a policy, part 1 and also part 2. This won't just help our planning committee, this just won't help developers. This will help our residents of the city. It'll help us recover from this horrible COVID crisis. And I just want to say that we have been through this crisis with the health side. We will continue to battle against the health implications that crisis has caused. So we have managed the crisis very well. But I think for tomorrow, what we have to do is we have to manage the crisis even better. And remember that all of us, this decision that we're making tonight, it will be set until 2030. There will be amendments coming in place. There will be supplementary plan documents coming in place to help build on part 1 and part 2 with SPDs. But the decisions that we take tonight will now determine the future of our recovery. Thank you, Lord Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Bell. Can I finally ask then if Council agrees to the recommendations of the report?
Agreed.
Agreed. Agreed.
Agreed. If anyone is not agreeing, will you please put that into the chat?
Agreed.
I'll give you a few seconds to do that.
Agreed.
Well, I'm hearing that the recommendations of the report have been agreed. So thank you very much for that, colleagues. If we can move on to item 11, which is questions by members. 5 written questions were received this month and replies were published on the council website with the other papers for this meeting at 4 p.m. today. And I'm advised that members will receive, if they haven't already received, an email link from the issue manager when the items circulated at meeting supplemental pack is published. So item 12 is on appointments, and I understand Councillor McCarthy wants to speak to add something to this. Councillor McCarthy.
Thank you very much, Lord Mayor. There were a couple of errors because we've done this very quickly this afternoon. Lord Mayor, can we remove Councillor Holland from overview and scrutiny? She can't be on overview and scrutiny and on cabinet. And just for accuracy, the Beamish representative there's no change on that. Councillor John Paul Stevenson will remain in that as appointed to that committee. Thank you, Lord Mayor.
So with those amendments, are the appointments agreed as set out?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Agreed. Agreed. I'm hearing those appointments are agreed.
Agreed.
Yes.
Agreed.
Councillor, right, if I can just go back to Councillor Ferguson, who wishes to make a point of order. Councillor Ferguson.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Just a point of clarification in terms of how business is proceeding. Given the unfortunate gagging of anything but executive sanctioned debate, I'm not clear.
Is this a point of order? Sorry, make it a point of order, please.
Yeah, it is a point of order, Lord Mayor. Will the motions that have been struck off this evening be rolled over, or are they deleted from council business?
They aren't deleted from business. You're perfectly at liberty to present them afresh at any time.
I'm very sorry to hear that, Lord Mayor.
All right, tough luck. Good night.
Well, he wants to understand.
I don't know if you heard what I said there. You're perfectly at liberty to present them all again at any time, or at any meeting, at any rate. Okay? Right, thank you for that. So that, in fact, concludes the meeting. And the next meeting is down for Wednesday, the 2nd of September, and I hope we can meet then in different circumstances. So thank you to all members for joining us this evening, and especially thank you for everyone who's been watching on YouTube. Stay safe, everyone. Thank you very much.